The NFL Draft hasn't always been a sprawling three-day affair shown on multiple TV channels. The first draft was held in Philadelphia way back in 1936. The crappy teams back then, namely the Eagles, complained that all the best graduating college players just signed with the teams that were already good. So the owners approved a format that still exists today. Teams would take turns selecting from a pool of newly eligible players, with the worst teams getting the opportunity to pick first. And if you think NFL teams are bad at scouting now, only 24 of 81 players from that first draft actually chose to play in the NFL. They didn't want to work in the NFL during the Great Depression. Over the next decade, teams created scouting departments, and the increased parity led to the growth of the game and, in turn, competing leagues like the AAFC and AFL, which in turn forced NFL teams to be even better at scouting and player compensation. The draft became an integral but invisible part of the NFL. That changed in 1980 when a brand new cable channel by the name of ESPN asked the NFL to air the proceedings. Pete Rozelle, the commissioner back then, was like, "Sure, I guess, but who'd want to watch this?" And he was right to think that. No matter how much the draft changes, it's still just a list of names being read. ESPN's gambit wasn't an immediate success. Throughout the 1980s, the draft was just held in a New York hotel. But as the league grew in popularity, the draft moved to Madison Square Garden in the 90s, then Radio City Music Hall in the 2000s, and in 2006, the NFL Network began airing the draft in direct competition to ESPN. People were watching. And the more people watched, the more the draft grew. In 2010, the draft expanded from 2 days to 3, with the first round brazenly airing in primetime against shows like Survivor and CSI. The result? A 30% rise in ratings and record viewership. 5 years later, more people watched the first round of the NFL draft than the final day of the Masters. And that's still not enough for the NFL. After 65 years in New York City, the 2015 draft will be held in Chicago. Why? Well, why would the NFL pay to use a New York space when it can make cities bid for the right to host it? Why not make it a bigger event that brings in more money and makes the sport even more dominant in our culture? As long as the draft offers the hope of improving your favorite team, you'll have a reason to watch, even if it's actually really boring.